publishers got to know their limitations. Battle Fantasia was released, well, in a lot of places. It had a pretty jumbled release, actually. To be frank, the awkward three-way publishing deal between Arc System Works in Japan, Access Games in North America, and 505 Games in Europe, coupled with Microsoft's bizarre game certification process, and Sony Computer Entertainment of America's weird hang-ups over English dubbing, provided enough problems for the game as it was back then. And Battle Fantasia's status as a C-list game certainly doesn't do any favors for its reputation. I think it's a decent game, but it was developed as a stopgap in Arc System Works' catalog a few years back. Battle Fantasia was made as part of Arc System Works' early efforts to branch out from Guilty Gear spin-offs and licensed tie-ins. As the company expanded over the years, its development methods became less stringent, and its developers were allowed to make their own games, and Battle Fantasia was one of the first of those games. Battle Fantasia was an experiment of sorts. Emiko Iwasaki, the game's director, said that she was given a lot of leeway in deciding what type of game would be made, more so than most fighting game directors have received in the past few years. And Iwasaki opted to make a game that was accessible, something that new players would be interested in and could learn fairly easily, with an additional effort made to draw female players into the arcades. The only directive from ArcSys was that advanced players should be catered to as well. Consumers have heard this for the past 4 years or so. Aside from the awkward grasp at female players, Iwasaki's comments have the same cadence as many PR statements from other companies. Fresh new ideas, highly accessible, easy to learn but hard to master, etc., etc. However, I think that the key difference between Iwasaki's goals and typical PR fluff is that Battle Fantasia's gameplay actually reflects those goals. This game's slower pace and use of exaggerated animation restricts the flow of battle to make things easier to follow, and its unique 90s-style RPG aesthetic garners plenty of attention. But its general game mechanics provide a steeper learning curve than what one would expect, and these mechanics act in concert with the character designs in different ways. Whether all of this was actually worthwhile is a matter of personal opinion, but the Battle Fantasia team definitely accomplished what they set out to do. Battle Fantasia uses 5 buttons, 2 for light and heavy punches, 2 for light and heavy kicks, and 1 for the Gachi button. The Gachi, or grace button, is a part of how the development team tried to streamline certain aspects of the game. Every advanced defensive action is mapped to this 5th button somehow. Let's call it the G button for now. The G button is used to recover from long falls, and to parry or Gachi match any kind of strike or projectile attack. Matches can be used on the ground or in the air, which is fairly important considering that players can't block in midair. While matching a move, both players are frozen for a split second, and the user of said match recovers slightly faster than they would while blocking. Successful matches also earn a significant amount of super meter. About a fifth or so is generated after every successful match. However, matches are only active for a split second, and while a successful match freezes both players, a missed match leaves its user prone. Furthermore, matches are susceptible to throws and command throws, and can only be used at a specific height in midair. Much like every other button-based parrying motion, of which, at this point, there are quite a few, good timing is required to make the most out of the Gachi match. Each attack has its own properties and rhythm, so trying to parry every attack the same way will rarely end well for you. However, there are times where a regular counterattack just isn't gonna cut it. Like, let's say, in the middle of a multi-hit super. Situations such as this are what the Gachi drive was made for. The Gachi drive is the counterpart to the Gachi match, the assault counter to its instant blocking, the slashback to its faultless defense. Okay, well, it's not nearly as exploitable as those, but you get the idea. The Gachi drive counters any hit with an attack that causes your opponent to reel backwards and enter a special juggle state. This state varies depending on whether the opponent attacked with a high, mid, or low attack. If the opponent used a high or mid attack, a high Gachi drive will knock them into the wall and bounce them back at you. This triggers a special juggle state, denoted by the dimmed background and blue after image effect on the sufferer, which allows you to follow up with attacks. This juggle state lasts for about 2 seconds, or until the opponent makes contact with the ground. Hitting the opponent knocks him or her back into the air, extending the time somewhat until they arc backwards towards the ground. However, using repeated attacks causes the juggle state to end much more quickly than it would otherwise. When the juggle state ends, the opponent's portrait turns blue, the after image effect disappears, and the background loses the doom and gloom appearance. If the opponent uses a low attack, only the low Gachi drive will counter it. Instead of triggering a wall bounce, it sends the opponent spinning like a top. While spinning, said opponent is enveloped in a hazy orange glow, allowing you to use combinations that would otherwise be impossible. This state also lasts for roughly 2 seconds, one of which is usually used up by the spinning animation in most circumstances, so making the most of it can be somewhat difficult, but it can also lead to big damage. Also, both drives advance upon the opponent during the counterattack animation, so it can be used in certain situations to cover some ground. However, drives are only potent at the beginning of the charge, so they are risky and they can be punished, or baited and punished for that matter. In addition, drives are not invincible, and players can be hit out of them. Drives can even be stuffed by supers or special moves that have some level of invulnerability, and players can be thrown at the end of their animations, so it's not the best way to get out of every situation. The Gachi match can usually be used as a buffer for the Gachi drive. During block strings, for example, one may match most of the attacks and then drive through a weak spot in the string to counterattack, gaining some meter and possibly inflicting some serious damage in the process. Now, I think that it's unreasonable to expect every block string to be matched move for move. But in theory, the Gachi match and drive are pretty potent defense mechanics, and it's easy to assume that attacking first puts you at a clear disadvantage when compared to defending and then counterattacking. However, the ways that most moves function in-game work well against both the Gachi match and the Gachi drive. Almost every character has a command attack or special move that has some sort of unusual rhythm to it. For example, some attacks can be held down or delayed, while others have a unique style of hitting the opponent. Incorporating these attacks into block strings, or for that matter target combos which also exist in this game, can break the rhythm of an otherwise predictable block string, which makes it difficult for the player on the receiving end of it to simply mash G and fish for a counterattack. Now, I realize it's possible that this is all coincidence or that I might be overthinking it, but I think that it's intentional because every playable character in the game has something like this. In most other fighting games, this sort of thing is usually restricted to 1 or 2 characters within the roster that have an entire move list of strange attacks with weird hitboxes and bizarre animations. In contrast, every character in Battle Fantasia has at least one move that works in this fashion, although some characters have moves that are more suited to staggering or mixing up hits than others, which I feel prevents the cast from becoming too homogenized. Finally, there's the heat state, which makes your moves a bit more potent. When you activate heat mode, your character starts to radiate energy, and your moves power up. This state also has different effects on different characters. Side effects include, but are not limited to, modified special moves, super armor, appearance of woodland creatures, shonen syndrome, a prognosis involving where cassette guns are actually used, fantasies involving impeccably coiffed men involving sickness, as well as other... Oop. Wrong picture. Wrong picture again. Ah, there we go. And the usual Arc System Works health modifiers are used as well, such as Scale, the percentage by which damage is scaled, and Guts, which is similar to Scale, but stacks on top of the latter based on how much health a combatant has. Basically, the less health a fighter has, the more damage scales. Because of these modifiers, most of the characters are actually much more even in terms of health and defense than they seem. Earlier, I mentioned that the Battle Fantasia team tried to make the game more appealing to female audiences. Now, ArcSys Works as a whole believes that adding backstory and visual novel elements to their games makes it more appealing to women, who they assume prefer to play at home, as opposed to men, who they expect to spend most of their time in arcades. So as one would expect, most of the team's effort to draw in female fans seems to have been focused on fleshing out the characters, since there's considerably more consistency in stuff like win quotes, intros, outros, and the like in this game than in most other fighting games. This could also explain why there's so much content in Battle Fantasia's story mode. There's tons of text, which was coupled with a few hours worth of voiceover in the original Japanese release. It's the same kind of logic that Bandai's Musou team uses when designing games for the Dynasty Warrior series, and I assume it's the same logic that ArcSys uses for the story-based trappings in their BlazBlue series. Speaking of BlazBlue, I'm reminded why Battle Fantasia turned out the way it did. It's regarded by fans, critics, and the gaming press at large as filler, something that was churned out to fill the gap between the last few releases of the Guilty Gear series and the first installment of BlazBlue. I personally believe that the game is better than that, but with the way the game was released both domestically and internationally, I can see why everyone thinks so. Two of the reasons why Battle Fantasia was developed were that ArcSys wanted to test their ability to render 3D models on their board of choice, and to make a more accessible game than Guilty Gear. The company accomplished both goals with Battle Fantasia, but went on to improve upon those aspects while developing BlazBlue. And since BlazBlue was far more successful, they've devoted considerable resources to that series instead. Long story short, you're probably not going to see a sequel to Fantasia that improves upon it in any way, shape, or form in the near future. Oddly enough, the fact that Battle Fantasia was made in 3D may be its only claim to fame in fighting game history, and not even in itself, but because of how it may or may not have influenced a far more popular game. It's often said that Battle Fantasia was the inspiration for Street Fighter IV. I don't think that it was a direct inspiration, since Street Fighter IV came out only a few months after Battle Fantasia's premiere in Japanese arcades. Rather, it seems to me that Battle Fantasia's release helped assuage the fears of the Street Fighter IV development team and the highly risk-adverse management of Capcom by proving that people would accept a 3D game on a 2D plane. Then again, this is coming from Ono, and I know that people think he's the devil in 20-something clothing, so make of it what you will.